My CFO left and they brought in a VP of finance who is my boss. And the first meeting I had with him, he said I looked like I should be dancing on a table instead of sitting at it.
I'm actually kind of in shock at that. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Kendall Berg. She's an internationally published author, TEDx speaker, and the force behind that career coach. After being stuck at a manager level for years, she earned 5 promotions in 6 years, that is. So that's almost 1 promotion every year. And now she helps professionals across the globe break through their ceiling. If you're wanting to further your career, if you're wanting to take control of your current role, and I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but this is the podcast for you. There's so much incredible career advice shoved in to this hour-long or hour and a half, whatever it might be, podcast. And I think you're really going to take so much from this episode. But before we start, as always, if you could do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button, 5-star, like button, whatever it is, wherever you are, I'd really appreciate it. It helps us so much more than you know. And the more likes and subscribes, all that kind of stuff we get, the more incredible guests we can get on the podcast. But without further ado, my name is Harrison Brown. This is the Into the Mind podcast, and everybody please welcome Kendall Berg. Okay, so Kendall, the first question has to be, why do so many people hate their jobs?
Loaded question to start us off. So a lot of our job satisfaction comes down to the relationships that we build at work and the general company culture. So very little of our job satisfaction generally comes from the actual tasks that we complete. There are people who sit in spreadsheets all day who love their job, and that's great for them as long as they have supportive leadership, a good company culture, and they're making enough money to live the life that they want to live outside of work, right? And so a lot of the time when we think of job satisfaction, we think of passion projects, right? You run a podcast, I run a business, and we think these are passions of ours and they bring us so much satisfaction. But if we were constantly dealing with horrible people and difficult clients and bad guests, we wouldn't like what we do either. And so much of corporate culture is about the people that you work with and your ability to build good, lasting, authentic relationships with those people. And if you can't, you get caught up in corporate politics. And that's the part that people really hate, is the fakeness that comes with that poor corporate culture.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And just from, I'm kind of in business myself, and I think that a motto that I kind of live by is that the one thing that you can't replace is the people that you surround yourself with. So if someone's going to try and poach a member of the team, which happens very, very regularly, it's very difficult to do that if they love the people they surround themselves with, because you can't recreate a team dynamic that easy. Whereas you can pay someone the same amount as they're already on at the other company. So it's a lot easier, or it's a lot harder to pull someone from a job if they really love who they're around.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why people work for startups, right? Startup culture in general tends to mean longer hours, broader scope. You're running leaner, so you don't have as much resourcing or people that you can delegate to. And the issue when that happens is that we think we're going to burn out because, oh, it's such long hours and it's so hard. But if we're surrounded by good people who are inspiring us, we're all moving towards a common goal, we're all excited to collaborate effectively, and we're all focused on the work in the same direction, people stay at startups for really long times and they don't burn out. Whereas somebody who sits in a corporate job where maybe they're only doing 30 hours of active work a week, but they're dealing with really difficult stakeholders and a lot of bureaucracy and a difficult boss and coworkers who don't want to do their job, they can burn out even in a less demanding, theoretically, role to a startup counterpart if the relationships and the people are the problem, because that's what really drags us down. Nobody likes to spend time with people they don't like in personal life or in work. It's just in work we have a little less agency over it generally.
Where do small businesses lose that startup mentality? Because I totally agree with you. And I think that in these huge conglomerates, a lot of the time you are a number and people
Mhm.
register that and it really demotivates them. Whereas in smaller businesses where you're part of a tight knit team, you're really valued. And if you're not there, the business will not move forward. And I think that really motivates people. So where do small businesses in your mind kind of lose that connectivity between all the team members?
Yeah, so there's a topic that I discuss at the end of my book called ghost culture, and I think this is where big conglomerates start to face this problem, is when the culture at the top of the house is different from the culture that the end employee ends up experiencing. And this can
Hmm.
happen due to acquisitions. This can happen just sheerly due to scale and the quantity of employees that we're trying to influence. But most often, it happens at the top of the company because every company, theoretically, has a wonderful company culture. That's what they put on the placards. That's what they put in your welcome pamphlet when you join the company. That's why they show you a video about the founder that gets you so excited, whether you work for a large company or small. I used to work for AT&T, and when they onboard new employees, they show you a video about the invention of the telephone and take credit for it. And this is a telecommunications company in the US. And they do this to get you excited, to get you motivated. But if the company's culture at the top is a ghost culture, meaning it's not trickling down into every level of leadership, then what the end employee ends up feeling is vastly different from what the company thinks they're creating. So, I'm gonna use Google as a great example of this. In the early 2000s, you guys probably remember as well, Google got famous for having cereal bars. Like, "Ah, I could go get
Hmm.
cereal in the middle of my office, and I can ride a scooter from my building to my other building." They have nap pods, and they built this ghost culture at the top of freedom and flexibility and chill, but the end employee was working 80-hour weeks because they're trying to build something from the ground up, and they don't have time to use a nap pod, or if they do, it's because they've been there all night and they're exhausted, or they don't have time to get cereal because they need to work through lunch. So it it's this is where companies go awry, is they think they have a certain culture. The very top of the house believes that that's the culture they're creating, but they're not hiring the right leaders under them, and they're not coaching their leaders effectively so that the end employee is getting the same culture that the company thinks they're creating, and that's where we end up with a big disconnect.
How are you going to avoid that in your business?
It's a great question. I think when you start as a small business, we all have these wonderful aspirations of what we're doing. My business is very purpose driven for me, in that my goal is to help as many people navigate the difficulty of working for somebody else as effectively as possible. And I think
Hmm.
it's really important when you're building a culture in your own company that you're all aligned around the same mission, right? The bigger a company gets, generally, the less oriented to their mission that they are. And when you get further and further from the mission, you get further and further from that startup mentality, further and further from that inspiration and purpose and direction. And so for my business, one of the big pieces is, how do we continue to help? How do we keep that at the center of what we're doing? How do we keep the end client as the focus as opposed to making money becoming the focus? The money should follow the purpose. And so I think purpose driven is a big piece. And I think the second piece for me is intentionally hiring the right people. Something that I pride myself on in my corporate life is that I am always focused on building the next generation of great leaders. I am always focused on hiring people who can expose their best skills to my team and add something new and add new value. And so truly being present for the people who work for me and coaching them into their area of genius, their area of excellence, and then supporting that growth at the right scale so that people don't end up stretched too thin or having too much bandwidth, is really important to maintain that culture at the more junior levels as well.
So how would you instill the culture that you're creating within the members of your team? Because I'm totally in agreement with you. But I think sometimes it gets hard with people that have different drives. And also it gets hard when people have different motivations, right? Some people are definitely money motivated. You know, they're going towards bonus, they're going
Mhm.
towards targets. Whereas some people, you offer them a promotion and they'll say no. They'll say, actually, I'm really comfortable here. I don't really want to move. I'm not money motivated. So how do you instill your culture in your team?
You hit the nail on the head with the way that you asked that question, which is every person is going to bring something different and be motivated differently. And you have to take the time to understand that for each individual to create a consistent culture. Right. So I do still have a corporate job. I've talked about this on my podcast as well. And I lead a large team. And there are people in my team who have very different aspirations and goals and strengths and weaknesses. But to make the team work together cohesively to create that consistent culture, I have to understand what all of those nuances are. And
Hmm.
this is why it's hard for a CEO to maintain a consistent culture when they have 10,000 employees, is because they can't know the nuances of every single person in their organization. That's not feasible. And then that becomes about scaling your leaders to understand the niche, which is a separate topic. But for me, it's to keep everybody moving in the same direction, you have to understand each individual. And each individual has to feel that what we're driving towards gets them what they need, right? So to your point, somebody who's money motivated, hey, we're building scale, we're building this vision, we're building this future to help as many people as possible. And the more people that we help and add value to, the more referrals we get, the more re-signs we get, the more clients we get. That allows you to scale your income, right?
Hmm.
If it's the person who just wants to do their job really well, great. Here are the metrics of how we're measuring success in your role. Here's how we're providing visibility into the importance of the work that you're doing so that you feel satisfaction and you feel effort and you feel s- that we are acknowledging how much it takes to do your job well, even though you're not pushing for promotion or you're not pushing for necessarily more money. And so understanding those nuances allows you to build the right infrastructure so that everybody is motivated towards the same culture. Where managers get it wrong is they think, but I care about X, so my whole team should care about X. It's a lovely thought. Doesn't necessarily work that way. And so unless we take the time to translate our culture, our company needs into the needs and the wants of the individual, we're always going to have a disconnect. And that's why the bigger the company gets, if we don't address those disconnects early, we start to shift and we get further and further and further apart until that ghost culture exists at the top where the CEO, Kendall Berg, goes, we have a passion and a purpose for helping people navigate difficult situations. And the end employee is, I'm burnt out. I'm not making enough money. I hate my life. I don't care about helping a single person if I can just get the heck out of Dodge, right? So we have to close those gaps early. We have to keep them closed. Otherwise, we start to shift like Titanic plates further and further apart from one another.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. And what do you think when it comes to these corporate jobs that do have ghost culture? What do you think it is about people, or what do you think it is about these jobs that keeps people hooked in? Why do people stay when they don't enjoy it? Because I've got so many friends that are in a job and they say, it's not great. I can't wait for this weekend to get absolutely smashed. And they just do this every single weekend and they're really looking forward to the weekend. And personally, I don't think that's a way to live because I think you should enjoy your job enough that you go into work and are as excited for your job as you are at the weekend. So, what do you think it is that keep people in jobs that they don't like?
So there's two things in my opinion that really keep people in a bad fit role that you're describing. First is golden handcuffs. I've been offered a piece of a potential IPO, or I've been
Mm.
offered such a high salary that I know if I leave, I'm not going to make that much money, or I have a bonus and it pays out in just 4 months. So if I can just survive 4 more months, I can get this bonus. And that's the smart financial thing to do, right? A lot of the time, clients who come to me who are looking to make a pivot or a job change, they're stuck in that position. Oh, my RSUs come in August, or my company's going to IPO next year. I just need the last 12 months. And what they don't realize is a lot of the time we have a lot of negotiation leverage with other companies. So I have left companies 2 weeks before my bonus and negotiated a signing bonus and said, hey, I
Hmm.
think your company is going to be a better fit for me, but I'm leaving a lot of money on the table. If you want me to leave right now, you got to meet me halfway. Otherwise, I'd love to talk to you next month, right? And we have a lot more negotiation power than I think we realize. And so the big piece is golden handcuffs keeps us stuck. The second piece is what I've loved to come to call self-efficacy. So self-confidence is the belief that you are great, right? I'd love for all of us to have wonderful self-confidence and think that we are awesome. But self-efficacy is the belief that things are going to work out in a positive way for your betterment for you. And a lot of people struggle with the concept of self efficacy. We tend to be very negative when we think about pursuing future outcomes. So, for personal, we may say, hey, I'm great at my job. I know I'm good at my job, right? I would guess many of your friends that you're referencing who don't like their jobs, they still think they're pretty good at them, but they don't have the self efficacy and the belief that if they leave, they're going to find something better. Or if they leave, their company is going to be successful. Or if they leave, they're going to be able to progress their career the way they want. And so when we lack self efficacy, we stay in bad fit jobs longer because we think oh, I'll just supplement it with nights and weekends, right?
Mm.
I'll have a nice glass of wine at 5:01 PM, and that'll be great, and then on the weekend, I'll vacation, and it'll be enough to survive. And one thing that I think is really interesting, just to wrap up this question, is I saw a video recently where this woman was talking about the cost of staying in a bad fit job. And she said, "Yes, you may be making more money, but the cost is now you're paying to eat out every night because you're burnt out and you don't wanna cook because you're mentally fried, and you're paying to buy yourself a nice little something on Thursday because Thursday was a rough day at work and now you're miserable, and you're
Mm.
paying to take a trip every month because if you don't get out of the office and take your PTO, you may actually crack and yell at someone, and there's a financial cost that comes with staying in a bad fit job that we don't always calculate. So even with a situation of golden handcuffs, sometimes that could actually be costing us more than it's getting us, but we're too in the weeds to step back and see that. And so people stay in those bad fit jobs usually for one of those 2 reasons.
So it's kind of like a bad relationship. Like just thinking of my
Yes.
so yeah, like some of my, I don't want to name here, but there's some of my friends that are in relationships that are potentially not right, and they've voiced their concerns while they're at the pub, but it's just too much of an effort to get out of. Or, vice versa, the girl might be doing that as well. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like that relationship, right?
Yeah, I often say that your career is very much like a marriage,
Mm,
and sometimes we get married too early and we pick a career path that's not the right fit for us, and we didn't really know what we wanted to be when we grow up, but we chose this path because it seemed safe or it seemed comfortable. Or we go on a date, aka an interview with a company, and we see a bunch of red flags, but we convince ourselves that it's not that bad because but they're gonna pay us a lot of money, or like it's a really fancy title. And like, can you imagine showing up to with your friends with this handsome man on your arm or with this beautiful woman?
mm,
And we convince ourselves that things are not as bad as they seem because
mm.
it's easier than looking for the right fit. And I think we do this in all areas of our life. A lot of what I talk with my clients, what I cover in my book is about building relationships. And most people are really bad at it, right? I became a coach because I was really bad at it, really bad at communication, really bad at building authentic relationships. And it hurt my career early on. And I had to learn to change that, and I joke that as I got better at communication in my career, I got better at communication in my marriage. Like, lucky for my husband, he has a built-in career coach at home, but it is one of those things where there are so many times the issues we face in work are not limited to our sphere of work. They extend into our personal relationships, they extend into our hobbies, and you're right, we end up in these bad fits, and we think, "Oh, but it'd be so much effort to fix it, and what are the odds I'm really gonna end up with somebody better?" And we stay, and we settle, and settling at any area of your life, I think, keeps you from optimal fulfillment.
A lot of people that are listening to this podcast will be in a job just as we described. And I think the question that they would ask is, within the next 3 to 6 months, how do I make those steps to go into something that I do love? What would be your advice?
So you have to start with understanding yourself. I talk a lot about personal branding, and I think personal branding is a phrase that kind of gets frankly overused now. It's a very like social media trigger happy word that we use. Um, but if you don't know what you are uniquely good at, and you don't know what brings you satisfaction, and you don't know what skills you add to a workplace, and you don't know how to talk about yourself, you are going to struggle to find a right fit job. So everything begins with understanding the self. I tell people a lot of the time, my gift in the workplace is that I'm a translator. I can speak to the CEO, and I can speak to your engineer developer, and I can speak to your marketing campaign manager, and I can speak to your call center representative, and I can tell them 4 different things, and they'll all hear the same thing. That is the power of a translator. And that is my unique skill. Now, I've held many jobs over my corporate career where I was able to leverage that skill, but I've also taken a few where I couldn't. And those jobs where that skill was not helpful were not fun jobs for me because I'm not bringing something new and different. I'm not bringing a skill that's really needed by the company. I'm not getting, acknowledgement for my efforts because I'm not changing the way that the business is running. And so you start with, what am I uniquely good at? How is it different than my peers? What value does it add a company? And then from that, we say, okay, then what do I need to be doing? If I'm a person who translates and brings organization, which are my two, what I call spikes, I need to work for a company that's in chaos and nobody's
Hmm.
talking to each other because that's where I'm going to add the most value. I'm going to come in and say, hey, you two should probably talk to each other. This is what you're both saying. Can we get agreement? Can we get direction? Can we start to make some progress? And that's where I'm going to add the most value. When I work for a company that's already organized and has great communication, I'm not a super valuable employee. I'm not a bad employee, but I'm not going to be great. And so once you understand yourself, then you can understand what type of job and what type of company culture you need to be successful. And then you have to build relationships. The job market today, whether you are a solopreneur, whether you are a CEO, whether you are a corporate employee, whether you're white collar, blue collar, the job market today is relationship heavy, more so than we've ever seen. Forbes published an article in November of last year that said 82% of jobs are being filled by referrals only. That's a high percentage of jobs, given that it was 14% in 2020. So we've had a huge shift to a it's who you know, not what you know kind of job search culture. And so once you know what you want to be doing, you know where you need to be, then you have to invest in building real relationships with people. What do they care about? What problems are they trying to solve? What is their company looking for? Can you get along with this person? Can you be honest and truthful and trust them? And then use those relationships to find the best opportunity for yourself. So if I was going to tell somebody listening, like, hey, you're in a dead end job, that sucks. We've all been there. I hate to tell you, we're all living the same life, different font. We've all been in a job we hate. You need to understand yourself, your special skills. You need to understand what kind of company you need to work for in order to optimize those skills. And then you need to work on meeting people. And you need to be at conferences, you need to be in people's LinkedIn DMs, but you have to be messaging that person you worked with 10 years ago who you really liked, who's now a CEO somewhere else. You have to be fostering those relationships. But what you'll find is that will become a jumping board for many roles. And one of the things I tell my clients is I haven't applied for a job in the last 15 years except for once because every job I ever took was somebody I worked with going, "Hey, I'm moving to this company. I think you'd be a really good fit. You wanna come with me and you could do this thing and I'll have you on my team," or "So and so is hiring at my company. You'd be great for this. I want you to come over." Every role is a tap on the shoulder, not a job application, but unless you're building that network, you are gonna struggle to see those opportunities for yourself, and you're gonna stay in that dead end relationship because you don't feel like you have something better on the horizon.
You know what has been totally pivotal in my career, and what I think and I would advise a lot of people to do is podcast, because the podcast doesn't need to be good. It doesn't need to have a camera. It can be over the internet, and you still end up meeting tons and tons and tons of people that and building all those relationships.
Yes, I love that. It doesn't need to be good. I have a saying, and it's, actually the background on my phone, and it's like an ugly circle, and it says, "Just make it, and then you can make it good." And then it has a pretty circle below it, and I've always liked that, like, just make it, and then you can make it good. But you're right. The reason I started my podcast was because I was getting into coaching. I didn't know any coaches. I didn't know any executive leadership. I didn't have the relationships I knew I was gonna need to run my business successfully, and I was like, "I wanna meet people." And I had a CEO on my show 4 months ago who called me and was like, "Yeah, so that was a great interview. Also, please come work for me. Like, I need you to come do this job because I don't have anybody who can do it, and you're great, and I think you would
Mm.
be awesome, and you could be my predecessor." And I was like, "Thank you so much. No, thank you." But you're right. Podcasting leads to so many incredible relationships, so many people who you learn about their space, and that helps build authentic connection, right? Stephen R. Covey said, "We don't the problem with communication is that we don't listen to understand, we listen to respond." And so often, I feel like in podcasting, we have to listen to understand because we're gonna have to ask a question again. We're gonna have to keep following up. We want to, build these relationships. And so, even outside of the relationships you build in the podcast, podcasting helps you create an excellent skill set for authentic communication, which I think is really pivotal in anybody's career.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of people, at least people that I've spoken to, they get kind of perfection paralysis where they think, oh, well, I don't have a super expensive camera and I don't have this, super expensive microphone. And I've heard podcasts and I've listened actively to podcasts that are filmed in someone's phone or recorded in someone's phone, but it's an interesting conversation. The quality is, it's great when it's good, but it doesn't need to be good. If the content is there in the actual conversation, if the goods are there, so to speak, people will still listen to it. Chisholm Hunter are the sponsors of the Into the Mind podcast, and without Chisholm Hunter, I would not be sitting here today. Chisholm Hunter are family-run luxury jewelers that have been going for over 165 years. They're official stockists of all the incredible watch brands like Tag Heuer, Tudor, Omega, Vacheron Constantin, Breguet, and many, many more. Now, I'm actually a watch collector myself, and whenever I buy a watch, there's one rule that I never break, and that is never get your watch from an untrusted, unauthorized retailer, because it's just a huge risk. And there's so many fakes kicking around at the moment that it's just not worth it. So whenever I get a luxury watch, I go to a trusted, family-run luxury retailer with a ton of experience, and it's also official stockists of the watch. And that retailer is Chisholm Hunter. I've got a ton of watches from Chisholm Hunter. They're also world-renowned for their luxury diamonds, and actually very recently, the cast of Outlander Blood of My Blood have been in getting their luxury diamonds from Chisholm Hunter. As a thank you for listening to this podcast, we're giving you a 10% off selected lines on Chisholm Hunter's website. All you need to do is type in the discount code CHSUB, that is CHSUB, on the chisholmhunter.co.uk website. That's chisholmhunter.co.uk for an exclusive 10% off selected lines. This is as a thank you to you. Also, I just want to say a big thank you to Chisholm Hunter for sponsoring the podcast. I always appreciate them, and they've been incredible with me and the support for this channel. So a huge thank you to Chisholm Hunter. And without further ado, let's get back to this conversation with, I never know whether to call her Kendall or that career coach, but you know what I mean. Is there one mistake that you see even the smartest people make over and over again in business?
They argue. It's simple. It's a simple mistake. Don't argue. If you have to argue, the other person probably isn't gonna change their mind anyways, right? So it's a fruitless uphill battle. 2, even if you argue and you're right, you don't get paid to be right. You don't get relationships because 'cause you're right? Right? We've all argued, going back to our dating analogy, we've all argued with a significant other. Did it go well? Did it end positively? Probably not. We probably took a break, we cooled off, we came back, and then we had an adult discussion, right? The big mistake that I see people make, especially in their careers, is that we choose to argue because we are defensive of our beliefs. So we
Mhm.
think, "I'm right in this situation. I know what we should do next. I know what the right move is." And we go, "I'm gonna argue till I'm blue in the face to convince the other people that I'm right so that we can do this thing." And this will hold you back from building meaningful relationships. This holds you back from getting what you want actually accomplished. And it holds you back from senior leadership progression because while many senior leaders I've worked with will argue with you, they didn't get there by arguing. They can argue now because they're in the top seat. They can just tell you no. And that's an amazing power to have. But unless you are the CEO, you don't usually get that. And so, what I teach my clients is tactically 2 things. One, which is acknowledge before you respond. So whenever you are dealing with another person, the best thing you can do is say, "Harrison, I totally agree with your perspective. That makes perfect sense why we would wanna do that. However, I have some concerns about it working in this situation." That is an acknowledgement of you, an acknowledgement of your opinion, an acknowledgement of your perspective before I go share why I don't think it's gonna work. And why that is important is because it makes people feel heard, it makes them feel valued, it shows clarity of understanding on your part before we go into, "Here's what I think we should do instead." So acknowledge before you respond is a big one. It diffuses 99% of arguments, and it makes better relationships. And the second thing is the answer is never no. It's always yes, but here's what that takes. Right? I
Mm.
tell, my leadership all the time, like, "I could get you the moon. It's gonna be expensive, and it's gonna take a while, but you want it, I can do it. Here's what it costs."
Mm.
And when you switch your mindset from, "No, I can't do that," or "No, that's the wrong decision," or "No, that's I don't have bandwidth," or "No, that's not my job." When you change your mindset to like, "Yes, anything is possible," with the right amount of time, the right money, the right resources, the right priority, work gets a lot easier because
Hmm.
the answer is always yes. But here's what that costs you. And, it's interesting. I had a conversation yesterday with someone where I was like, hey, I'd be happy to do that. The cost is you don't get any of these other things. Is that a trade off that you'd like to make? And if the answer is yes, then great. That's an easy trade off for me. I'm just going to do this one really difficult thing instead of these 10 other easier things. But if the answer is no, I need you to do those 10 other things, then it's great. I appreciate this discussion. And like this was a good dialogue and we move forward. And so the biggest mistake people make is they argue. And the tactical two things they can do to diffuse that is acknowledge other people before you respond and make sure that you're always providing what I call optionality, right? I'd be happy to do that. Here are your options. I'd be happy to do that. Here's what that costs. It's always going to help in any life, whether you are a business owner, whether you are a CEO, whether you work for a company. It diffuses so much tension when the answer is always yes. Here's what that is. Here's what that costs. Here's what that trade off is. It eliminates a lot of frustration and it's easier for you. Nobody wants to sit there and argue for 3 hours. It's exhausting.
It's an interesting thing you said there. You said, someone came to you and said, I want you to do this thing. And you said, well, I can drop these other 10 small things in order to do that one big thing. And I think a problem that a lot of people face is management or a senior team will, especially in small businesses, by the way, they'll start adding things. Oh, can you just do this? Can you just do this? Can you just do this? And then eventually the job that you were actually hired for, you're doing 3 different jobs. And, I've
Mhm.
experienced it firsthand. I'm involved in tons of different areas that my JD does not reflect what's going on in everything else. So how can somebody effectively communicate when they believe that the senior team are starting to unload on them?
Yeah. So if you start early with the yes and the optionality, it prevents some of that,
Hmm.
right? Because, hey, yeah, I'd be happy to change my JD from this to this, but it requires not doing this old job. Are we all cool with that? But you're right. There are definitely times where leadership is like, I say it's like drinking out of a fire hydrant. Like all the water is rushing towards you. And they're like, these are the 50 million things I need you to do. You get no help. Good luck to you. Um, and when that starts to happen, it becomes, to me, a conversation about strategic priorities. If the strategic priorities of the organization or of the team have changed materially, then it makes sense for the scope of my job to change materially to match. But what ends up happening is we end up dragging all of our old tasks with us while we're
Hmm.
picking up new tasks. We just keep them because somebody needs to do it. Well, this report's been really important. I've been running it for 5 years. We got to keep running it. And we don't sit back to evaluate, okay, if these are my new strategic priorities, these are the new things I need to be focused on. Do any of the old things matter? Maybe a few of them do, but probably not all. And then do all of the new things matter? Probably a few of them, maybe not all. And so, what I find is a really helpful conversation is most people in corporate have one-on-ones with their boss, and we use them really poorly, and they end up being vent sessions like, "These are the 5,000 things on my plate. Help me, boss." And the boss is like, "Whoa, I don't know what to do with any of this information." But if we go into that conversation and we say, "Hey, what are your top 3 strategic priorities for the team right now?" And they go, "We need to implement AI, we need to get more efficient, and we need to make sure that we don't lose any of our accuracy. Like, those are my top 3 strategic priorities." Great. I'm running this report. It's on old data. It's on bad data. It needs to be automated. I'd like to automate that, but to automate it, I need bandwidth for the next 4 weeks to focus on that and get that done, but then I'd never have to run it again. But it means putting on hold these other things. Does that align with your strategic priorities? And the boss goes, "Yes, but I can't give you 4 weeks." And you go, "Cool. So then that's going to stay manual, which is going to take this much of my time, right?" And we have to have this two-way dialogue of you said your priorities are these. These are the things I'm working on. Are all of these still important to those strategic priorities? And which ones can we deprioritize or delay or get somebody else to do? And it doesn't mean that your JD doesn't change. A lot of the time, our JDs will, as job description for anybody listening who's like, what is a JD? But your job description may change over time. But where it becomes a problem is when your job description is changing and it's not in alignment with company goals. It's
Hmm.
become something else out of necessity, but that is not a instrumental role for what the company is trying to achieve. And that's where we have to make sure we're constantly coming back. I do a strategic refresh every 6 months of, hey, here's all the roles in my team. Here's all of the goals at the top of the company. Here's how each person maps to those goals. And if they don't map to a goal, they're probably in an unnecessary position, which means they either need to have their JD changed to do something else or it's a position eliminated. And this is how CEOs think of their business. So if you, the end employee, don't take agency and power and control to have that conversation to evaluate how you're aligning to priorities, that's when people get laid off and they're like, "But I was doing so much." And I'm like, "Yeah, you were, just not the right things." And that's the hard part is most managers suck at communicating that, so I'm not putting it on the end employee. Your manager should be having these conversations with you, but to take agency and power, you should have these conversations with your boss and say, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Does this make sense? Is this the right course of action?" And then you have to be honest about what your capacity is. Most people are great at establishing boundaries, but suck at maintaining them.
Hmm.
Like, "Yeah, I don't work past 5." And then at 5:02, your boss is like, "Hey, I need this thing." And you're like, "Uh-huh, cool. Yep, I'll be online till 7. I would love to do that for you." And then the boundary is destroyed. And so if we don't maintain our boundaries, if we're not consistently giving the same story, "Hey, I'd love to take that on, but I just don't have bandwidth. What can we deprioritize to make space for it?" The yes ands. And then is this aligned to a strategic priority? Yes, and if we don't do that consistently, that's how we end up in this like, hey, I'm working a 60-hour work week on a bunch of tasks that make me miserable and a job that I don't like for a boss who doesn't listen to me. And that's when it all kind of erodes and falls apart.
I think where it can get difficult, especially for senior management or CEOs in particular, is nobody is going to care about the company as much as you do. And it's really
Mhm.
hard to get out of the mindset that why doesn't she or he care about the company as much as I do? They really struggle to understand. And I've been there. I really struggle to understand why someone would clock out. And I'm like, well, there's these 3 things that need done. I'm going to be working overtime. Why is it nobody else? But I think that's something that CEOs really, really struggle with. How would you advise to communicate to a CEO when they're putting too much pressure on you and they're putting too much work on you? Because I think inevitably it does happen. It's a case of when, not,
Yeah. Some of this is generational, right?
Hmm.
I think that there are certain generations that I always say they grinded their way to the corner office, right? They like worked the 80-hour weeks. They're there. Now they're the CEO and they look at you and they're like, "You lazy peons. I worked 80 hours. You should be doing the same," right? Like, let's be honest. And there's definitely a cultural and a generational piece to that. I've worked for some CEOs who are like, "Hey, it's 5 o'clock. You better get out of here. Like, we don't work late. Time to log off. Thanks so much for your day." I've worked for some really great, really work-life balance minded CEOs, but you're right. It is a matter of when you're going to work for an executive or a boss who's like, "Hey, it's Friday at 5, but I need you to hustle all weekend to get this report out by 8 a.m." versus it's never going to happen. So, in the situation where you are getting too much work put on you, one, your boss doesn't know. So, this is a big misconception that I see. We think our boss has given us 50 tasks and they have remembered that they've given us 50 tasks. They have a list somewhere in a notebook titled Kendall with all of the things they've asked Kendall to do, and they do not have that. Okay. They have forgotten. They have gone to sleep. They have eaten. They have drank. They don't know anymore. And so, what's really important is to educate upward what we are doing. And what I mean by that is not like, I sent 58 emails today. Steve, that's too many emails. Like, we don't need to get that tactical, but your boss does not realize the full scope of work that you own. They don't, because especially if you're a high up performer, you're autonomous, you're operating independently, they're throwing things over the fence to you, and then they're never thinking about them again. And
Hmm.
so part of it becomes what I would say education rather than pushback. Education is, hey, CEO, I wanted to do a recap of everything that's happening in our space right now so that you have clear visibility. I'm working on project 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are large scopes of work. Are all of these still key and important? 99% of the time, at least one of them isn't anymore, unfortunately. And we just never got that memo. So that's a hard pill to swallow. But starting with, hey, did you remember that you asked me to do all of this? Did you did you catch that? Is that all aware? Like step 1 is building awareness and education. Then step 2 is saying, great, here's the people that I have, whether you are independent contributor and you're just you or you run a huge team. Here's how many. I like to put things in terms of hours or in dollars. Most CEOs think in terms of dollars. That's personal preference. Here's how many dollars of work my team can produce in a month based on capacity, right? So if the average employee is making $10 an hour, which if you're making $10 an hour, call me, we can fix that. But $10 an hour and you can work 40 hours a week and you work 4 hours a month, you can work, you get $1,600 a month of effort out of Kendall. Once you've calculated that, and then you say, hey, here's how many people I have in dollars. Here's how much work you're asking me to output in dollars. And here's the gap. Usually what happens is if Kendall has $1,600 of work a month, but we're tasking her with $3,500 worth of work, the CEO is going to go, oh, that looks bad. That's too much. And you're going to go, uh-huh. So we have a few options going back to optionality. We can deprioritize some stuff. We can delay some stuff, or we can hire 2 people under Kendall who can then help with the rest of this work. How would you like to move forward? And that doesn't mean that Kendall never works overtime, right? There have definitely been days where I've been asked to do something and I've logged on at 4 a.m. to get it done, or I've stayed on late, or I've worked on a Sunday. It happens in life. It should always be time bound and it should always be minimal. It should be the exception, not the rule. When it becomes the rule, that's when we have an issue. And so, step 1, you educate up. Hey, here's all the stuff I'm doing. Step 2 is you educate cost and capacity. Hey, here's how much capacity we have, and here's what you're asking for. We got a big problem and disconnect. And then step 3 is here's what we can do to solve this. And if the CEO comes back and says, well, I expect you to do 360 hours worth of work this month when I'm only paying you for 160, you go, cool. Seems like a great time for me to start looking for a new job. Right? Because there's one thing to say, hey, I expect you to work overtime this weekend and get a report out. It's another thing to fail to recognize where there are legitimate, ongoing, persistent issues. And so, what I always tell people is give your company the chance to do the right thing by you, give them the information to do the right thing by you, educate them. If they choose not to, then it's time to look for a new job. Most people skip the educating part and they go, I'm so burnt out. My
Hmm.
CEO is so hard to work for. He gives me so much work, and they quit. But maybe the CEO just didn't know and they forgot, which happens all the time. It's a good life lesson. But the same is true of, your significant other. If you're like, do the dishes. You're like, yeah, but you already asked me to do the laundry and sweep the floors and make the bed and take the kids to school and go to the grocery. And I forgot dishes because I was doing 50 other things. Same issue, right? We forget and we expect that everyone is thinking about us as much as we are thinking about us. And they're probably not.
Hmm. I think it's interesting what you said there about the exception, not the rule. Working overtime when there's there's exceptional circumstances going on. There's a trending topic or a podcast guest that's
Mhm,
incredible that we need to edit fast in order to get out.
mhm.
And for the most part, my team are incredible. There's times when there's new watches being released. I work in the watch industry, so there's new watches being released, and they'll come in early, they'll work late to get things done, which is incredible. But I think when it gets tough for management or CEOs or company founders, whatever it might be, is when people just point blank refuse to even stick in at those important moments. And I
Mhm.
do feel, and I'm not sure if you feel this way, you might assassinate me, so I do apologize.
I
But
love it.
I do feel like there's a culture of laziness that is developing with ChatGPT, AI, social media, complaining. People seem to want the prize without putting in any work.
So I don't disagree with you. And I love that this topic has come up because this is one of the spicier things that I talk about on the internet because we'd all like to pretend that we can work 4 hours a day and be millionaires and do nothing. Like, what a dream.
Mm.
Not the reality. And it's funny, I'm giving a TED talk in December and it's specifically on this topic of perceived laziness. That's literally the whole purpose of the talk. And there is this perceived laziness trend that is occurring in the workplace And it is because of exactly what you're describing, which is the employee who's like, yeah, I'm not doing that. It's 4:45. I'm going
Hmm.
home. And your boss is like, this is a report to the CEO. It's got to get out today. Like, you have to stay. And the person's like, no. And you're like, what is happening? Right. So there's definitely this cultural shift happening of like, hey, I don't want to work late. I don't want to do extra work. I don't want to put in extra effort, but I expect you to pay me more, promote me, give me more opportunity, give me more scope. And the way that I always describe it is that I'll prove to you I can do it when you give it to me, but I won't do it ahead of time. And
Hmm.
if you use the example of a doctor, if you were going to have heart surgery and the doctor said, oh, so I've never done heart surgery, but I promise I'm gonna be really, really good at it. When you pick me as your doctor for heart surgery, it's gonna go really well. You should just trust me and hire me. You would never hire that doctor. Versus if another doctor's like, "Hey, I've done 50 different heart surgeries in the last 6 months. I worked through my family vacation because I really cared about it and I wanted to be great, and, like, I wanna be your doctor for your heart surgery, and here's all of my accolades and all of the proof that I can do this." You're for sure gonna hire that doctor. And when it comes to the corporate world, we don't put that lens on, and especially when it comes to promotions, this is common right now in Gen Z. It was common in millennials 15 years ago, so I'm not throwing shade on any specific generation. But there's this like, "Well, I don't wanna do the job of my boss until you pay me for the job
Hmm.
of my boss." And your boss's boss is like, "Yeah, I don't even know if you can do that job yet. So until you prove to me you can do that job, until you can prove you're the right heart surgeon, I'm not signing up to have you do it." So there's definitely this perceived laziness. I think AI is gonna make it worse. I was talking with somebody actually last night that I companies are driven to automate so much with AI right now, and they're gonna do a reduction in workforce. Every company will. Sorry, that's the harsh truth. You wanna avoid it, don't be one of the people who gets eliminated. But they're gonna do eliminations. They're gonna automate as much. So you're gonna have all these people at the junior levels who are now doing the jobs of what used to be 5 people, and they're using AI and they're
Hmm.
doing all of these things. You're gonna have nobody in the middle. And nobody wants to be a manager and nobody wants to take on that responsibility and nobody wants to coach. Vizier did a study that said only 38% of Gen X and millennials are willing to be managers because they think it's such a bad job. So then you have this big gap in the middle of middle management where there's nobody who wants to do that work. And then you have executives. And then all the executives are going to retire and you have nobody to the
Hmm.
AI junior specialist to take those roles, and you're gonna have this weird gap in the middle. So I'm really curious to see how corporations are gonna adjust for this as AI gets implemented, and we could do probably a whole nother episode about it. But going back to your original question, when people think like, "Oh, I'm not gonna stay on late, I'm not gonna do this. I'll just use ChatGPT to do this work," and they don't validate it, they don't check it, and in my opinion, AI is still in its infancy. It's not accurate enough to be widely trusted, and they're not willing to do the work of the next level, yet they expect the next level. You do get this perceived laziness issue. You get this issue where managers are like, I don't want to hire young people. They're not going to do anything. I don't want to bring them in. They're not going to do the work. And so I do think this is an issue. Now, you always have high performers, right? And the high performers in that group are going to rise to the top and they're going to be the people who get promoted really quickly because they're willing to do the work when nobody else is. But I stand by what I said that like overtime is an exception, not the rule. If your boss is demanding you work 80-hour weeks, your boss sucks, right? But if your boss says, "Hey, we have this really important thing due," like I run a budgeting team. Budgeting season sucks. It is 3
Hmm.
weeks of our life where we eat, sleep, live, and breathe budget from 5 a.m. until 10 p.m., and it blows, and I know it. And I have a meeting with my team before every time, and I'm like, "Hey, so the next 3 weeks are gonna suck. Everybody take the 4th week of October off because by then you're gonna need it. Everybody plan on, like, taking Thanksgiving and Christmas off because 'cause you're gonna need it. Bear with me for 3 weeks, and let's just get through this as best as we can." But then the rest of the year, I never ask for overtime. I'm never gonna put it to them because I know I'm saving all of that goodwill for these 3 weeks that are gonna be miserable, right? So, there is a time to respect what your boss is doing, and again, if you have this two-way dialogue, if you're willing to express like, "Hey, this is now the 10th time you've asked me to work late on Fridays in the last 10 weeks," like, "That's not sustainable. This is a boundary that's being crossed." That's very different. But I agree with you, Harrison, that if it's a one-off, like, "Hey, I really just need your help with this," the best thing you can do for your career is just suck it up and do it. You don't wanna do it all the time, But in those exceptional cases, you definitely wanna be more of the team player than the, "But it's 5 o'clock" groups at work.
Yeah, I think it's having empathy, right? I think that the most important thing that I've learned, and I definitely struggled with this. I've got major ADHD, so everything comes out, whether I like it or not. It's gonna come out. So I got into a lot of trouble because I would just say the thing that nobody would say. That's shit. So change it. Like I just come out and say it, and obviously you can't act like that. And I grew and mature and learned. But I think having empathy for people, like knowing what they're going through, understanding that this job does kind of suck. You've been doing it for the last 3 years and it's exactly the same process. It might be a bit mundane. Why don't you take some time off? I think
Mhm,
a boss that has empathy is a boss that you want to work for. And I do think that that's one of the key pillars in leadership that a lot of leaders tend to forget because people become numbers. And that's, as we were talking
mhm,
about at the start, as the companies get bigger, the bosses don't know the people that are working in the stores or working on the website. So they have no
mhm,
empathy for them. And that's when you become, what,
mhm.
what did you call it? Was it ghost culture?
Yes, yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. We all have tunnel vision, that our job is the most important. Kind of when I was talking about educating your CEO, everyone thinks that everyone else is thinking about them as much as they're thinking about them, right? I think everyone is thinking about Kendall as much as Kendall thinks about Kendall, and it's not. And if you can't get out of your own needs to think, well, what is Harrison focused on? What does he need? What are his priorities? What are his obstacles and objectives? You're going to have a hard time building relationships at work, whether that's boss to employee, whether that's employee to boss, whether that's employee to employee and peer to peer. The biggest mistake I see people make when it comes to building cross functional relationships is they go, but I need this. I'm like, cool. Yeah, we all need a bunch of stuff. Why is your thing so much more important than all this other things that I have to do? But instead, if I go to you and I say, hey, Harrison, I know you're really focused on growing your podcast right now. I want to help you do that. Here's what I need. I need this. And what that's going to allow me to do is promote your podcast on my social channels and take it up the chain to my leadership and get you exposure to these great executive guests. And so I need you to do this for me, but I want to help you in return. And here's how that is going to balance. You're much more likely to help me than if I go, "Hey, Harrison, can you fill out this form for me?" And you're like, "Dude, no. This is the 10th email like this I've gotten this week. No, no more forms." And so if we can get out of our own way and start to think about what's important to other people, that's when you start to see work really improve and really get better and not be this, like, selfish Kendall works in a silo, and you mentioned being really direct. I'm very direct, right? Part of why I became a coach is because I started my career with, like, "You're all stupid, and that's not gonna work." And I had a VP be like, "So listen, you're really smart, but that's not gonna fly, and you need to figure that out." And I was like, "Oh, okay." It seemed right in my head, and I was right, just for the record. Um, but you grow, you mature, you learn to communicate, and you learn to have empathy for other people, and that's what's gonna help you work together, and if you don't, you have the ghost culture issue, you have the CEO demanding constant overtime hours issue, you have the lack of resourcing. All of that comes down to being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes and recognize what's important to them.
Do you think that with AI coming in and all these other technological advances, that the 9 to 5 culture is dying?
I it's a hard question to answer. I'm laughing because I shared an article with some of my clients yesterday that this AI company did an interview where they were talking about working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. They were like, "Our new company norm is that everybody in our company works 12 hours a day, 6 days a week." Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's not a thing. It shouldn't work. Um, but I think the 9 to 5 culture, if you go back to, like, the early beginning, was really based on factory workers, right? 9 to 5 was a factory worker implementation. At that time, like, the corporate white collar jobs that we know them today didn't really exist in the same fashion. 9 to 5 wasn't a standard schedule. School hours were much shorter. Like, there was all these differences, right? And we've kind of migrated to a 9 to 5 for consistency with education for children and for working in employees and for standard shift lengths and all kinds of things. But I think with the introduction of AI, what you're going to see is some things get much faster, but those people take on many more things. And where I think companies have missed the mark is I'm a firm believer that burnout is caused by mental load, not time. And what I mean by that is when you are burning out, it's not because you're working 80-hour weeks, it's because there's too many things in your head that you're trying to give equal energy to all the time. And because you can't disconnect, you burn out. And that doesn't matter if you're working 30 hours or 80 hours. If you have too many things in your brain, you are going to burn out because your mental load is too high. And we see this in relationships where wives will leave their husbands because they're like, hey, you didn't do all these things. And the husband's like, well, you should have just told me. And the wife's like, yeah, but if I have to tell you to do all these things, I still have to carry the mental load for telling you to do all of those things, which doesn't actually save me any mental bandwidth, which is what I need. And we see this in work where like the mental load is getting heavier, even if the hours aren't getting longer. So, my concern with AI is companies are going to say, hey, you're so much more efficient. Now, Kendall does the job of 5 people, but it doesn't
Hmm.
take her as long because of AI, but she's now carrying the mental load of 5 people and she's going to burn out because she can't do that consistently. And so, I'll be curious to see from a timing perspective how this impacts the 9 to 5. But this will either mean we have to go to shorter work days because the mental load that we're carrying is so high that we can't operate 9 to 5 effectively, which I don't know would be a great outcome, or we're going to have to shift the way we think about work, where we start to divvy up workloads based on this mental load concept as opposed to like hours per productivity dollars, which is the way many companies think about it today is Kendall produces X widgets in for this much dollars, therefore she costs this much per widget. We're going to have to move away from that and into like Kendall is carrying 900 widgets. We have a problem where like Kendall can only carry 50 widgets. We have caused an issue, right? So I do think there's going to be an impact to 9 to 5. Some people are saying, we're going to work longer hours because AI is going to make us so efficient we don't have to think. But the parts that the human is going to have to do with AI are all the parts AI can't do, which means they're all the emotional people connection, human parts of it. And those are the bits that have heavy mental load. So I would love personally to see us go to 4 day a week work weeks. Lots of studies internationally have shown that people are more efficient, they're more effective, they're able to operate better, we have better output, better productivity if you get a 3 day weekend. Um, I personally would love to see us move that direction. I don't know that the corporations in charge of our work schedules are going to be down for that, but Jamie Dimon, if you're listening, 4 day work weeks. I think that'd be really stellar for the world. So
It's it's interesting the different takes on work based on different companies. And so I'm in the luxury watch industry, and typically that's a older generation, high luxury industry. It's very much 9 to 5. You come into the office, but there has been a shift as fresher faces essentially have come in. There's been much more working from home. There's been so much more flexibility. I mean, I'm filming a podcast at 5 p.m. It will probably be 7 by the time we finish. I have a studio in my flat. So there's tons of flexibility when it comes to that. And it's interesting it's almost generational. The older generation, I'm going to get shot for saying this, but the older generation are very much like, you need to be in the office from 9 until 5. It's extremely strict. You need to wear a suit and tie. Whereas the new generation are like, well, wear joggers because they're comfy. You're doing something that kind of sucks, so chill out a bit. And why don't you come in at 12 and work late? But it's this, you're getting the same amount of work, but it's just less
mhm,
stringent. And it's interesting that split and that kind of mental divide between an older generation and a newer generation.
yeah. Well, and I think, so I agree with what you just said. To give the older generations like a little bit of support, a little bit of defense. They were never trained on how to manage people, and they were
Hmm.
certainly never trained on how to manage people remotely. And so I do think it's a comfort thing for older generations of like, come into the office where I can see you so that I can make sure you're doing your job. Now, younger generations who have been remote for a larger portion of their life or who did school remote or who have grown up in working hybrid or remote environments, were like, why do you need me in the office? I'm just going to sit on Zoom all day. Like, what? I can sit on Zoom in my home office. Why am I here? And so, because the generations weren't taught, they weren't educated, they weren't coached in how to manage remote employees, They're like, "Come back to the office because that's what I know, and that's what I know I can do." Right? So I do think there is an aspect of like education gap that causes part of the problem. Even millennial managers, there are plenty who suck. And we were raised on managing remote teams, right? So shout out to us. But I do think, yes, the older generations, they want more structure. They want more consistency. And I think it's because for them it's more defendable. I earned my salary because I was in the office 9 to 5. I earned my salary because I wear a nice
Mm.
suit. It's like a thing that they grew up with. And I will say in younger generations, there's always like that one employee who poisons the well, who doesn't do anything, right? Who's sitting on their hands at home or going to the gym for 3 hours in the middle of the day or doesn't answer their call when they're called and doesn't respond to emails in a timely fashion. And they're like, I want that one person in the office, but I can't bring them back unless I bring everybody back. So I do think there's a bit on both sides. What I think is an interesting shift that I'm seeing is these large companies that have always had this, like, you would be lucky to work for us reputation. Google, Amazon, Apple, Disney, like the big, I call them golden ticket companies, the big golden ticket companies. They're like, come back in office or else. And all the small companies to keep up are like, you don't have to come into office if you work for us. You can wear joggers. You can chill. Like, we're super cool. Come work here. And what we're seeing is less and less people wanting to work at those golden ticket companies because they're so strict and because they're so stringent, and people shifting towards like, "Hey, I'll work for a company I've never heard of before if they're remote and they're gonna pay me decent."
Hmm.
And so I think you're right. There's 2 cultures. There's younger and older generations of like more strict, wears a suit, goes into the office, more flexible, joggers, works from home. And what we're seeing is as smaller companies are getting bigger and they're built by the younger generation, you've got almost 2 totally different company cultures coming into exist at the same time, and one of them is gonna have to give. I don't know which one is going to win in this battle. I have my theories, but I think, like, that's the big 2 classes that are being created.
See, I struggle with the working from home thing, and it's kind of a hypocritical me saying that because I do a lot of my work is in my studio at home.
Mhm.
But the reason that I struggle with it is because I've got so many friends that will text me, and they'll what they do is they shove a card in between their keypad on Teams so that so that it keeps pressing a button, and then it says that they're online but they're not, and then they just leave. And that's what they do. Or what they do is they finish their work really really early, and then the next day they do nothing. And it's a hard one because to an extent, well, if they finish their work then they're done, but at the same time if they were in the office they probably would do more work for the company. So it's like, well,
Mhm.
I don't know. I just kind of I don't know how you feel about it, but do your employees work from home or do they work in the office?
They work from home.
Okay, and how have you found that?
So, I think you're spot on. There's always, like I said, the poison in the well, the one
Uh,
person who's, like, figured out how to keep their computer alive, like, they have a YouTube video playing forever
mm,
in the background, and it keeps their computer awake all day or whatever it is, right? There's always people like that. I think it comes back to coaching managers on how to manage remotely, right? And I'm a big believer in management checkpoints. So my team, anytime they're assigned anything, they're given checkpoints with me so that I don't have to micromanage them. I don't have to micromanage you because we already have checkpoints scheduled and you're going to show up to this checkpoint. You're going to tell me what's going on and then we're all going to move on with our lives. And there are some people on my team who require more checkpoints because they're going to put a card in their keyboard and they're going to keep it active and they're going to disappear for 5 hours. I'm not going to know what they're doing. And there are other people on my team who don't need that at all because they're pinging me every 15 minutes with something else that they've thought of that they want to go do to help the company. Right. And so I think some of it comes down to management practices. Are you managing your remote employees in an effective way? Are you meeting them where they're at to ensure they're doing the right amount of work? And Barbara Cochran did an interview years ago where she said she loves firing people, which I don't think is a great quote taken out of context. But the reason she said it is she's like, if I have one person who's underperforming, who's putting the card in their keyboard and walking away for the day, everybody else on the team sees that and feels
yeah.
it. And if they're working super hard, they're now demoralized, demotivated, frustrated. And the best thing I can do for all of them is fire that person. And to an extent, I subscribe to that theory. Um, I always have one of my leaders manage people or interview people when I'm hiring. And he's so funny. He tells everybody in the interview, he's like, Kendall is great to work for as long as you do your job. And if you don't do your job, she will be hell on earth to work for. So just keep that in mind. And it's true because I expect you to do your job. And I don't care if you log off at 2 p.m. if you're done. I don't. It doesn't mean I'm not going to give you more work the next day when I see you logging off at 2 p.m. But if you're doing your job, you're doing it while you're meeting my checkpoints. You're not going missing in the middle of the day. I'm not babysitting you. But I have had employees who have gone missing in the middle of the day and I have fired them and been like, hey, I can't have you sitting around doing nothing while the rest of the team is working hard.
Hmm.
And I think it defends the boomer mentality of come in office, right? But
Yeah.
you've got to be able to manage to both.
What do you think about the new laws that are coming in around the dismissal of people that are working for you, and specifically that they are entitled to more rights on the first day that they begin work?
You're trying to get me on some type of list, I can tell, Harrison. No, I think I think in some ways we have over pivoted to protecting the employee because it is so hard to fire people who are legitimately poor performers, right? And I'll give you a specific example. I had an employee who worked for me who didn't show up for work for 2 weeks. Didn't take PTO, didn't message, didn't email, just no showed. 2 weeks, left all their deliverables, nothing got done. Okay. While they're out, we find all kinds of mistakes in their work that we hadn't been catching before because we weren't as in the weeds that had to be resolved. We get it fixed, we get everything cleaned up, employee comes back. It took me 4 months to fire that employee with cause.
Hmm.
They didn't show up for 2 weeks. I can't imagine not showing up at my job for 2 weeks and then being like, "You can't fire me. Good luck." Like, I just think it's wild. So I do think in
Hmm.
some ways, because we are trying to follow such a due process to protect litigation against these companies, it is really hard to get rid of poor performers. And that does hurt all of your high performers who are watching this person and they're like, they didn't show up for 2 weeks. Why am I working so hard if I could just do nothing and it's going to take you 6 months to fire me anyways? Like, why would I do that? And it incentivizes bad behavior, right? I have had this thought of like, if I stopped working, how long do you think it would take them to fire me? If I stopped doing my job, stopped responding to emails, stopped responding to Teams messages, stopped managing my TA, 6 months, 9 months, I could collect a paycheck that whole time and do nothing. And it would
Hmm.
take them months to terminate me. And that incentivizes bad employee behaviors. It incentivizes the, hey, I put my computer on awake and I left for 5 hours, right? It's not, I don't believe, good for the companies. Now, the flip side is we have to protect people from wrongful termination,
Yeah, agreed.
right? Where like they are working hard and doing all the right things, they're getting fired for no reason, also not good. So I don't have a perfect answer for this of like where does the litigation and the legal side need to sit to both protect the good employees and penalize the bad ones. I don't know that there's a perfect answer for that. Um, but I think even we're really gonna get me in trouble today, and I love this. Even like even employee relations tickets,
Hmm.
right? I have clients who come to me who are like, "My boss legitimately yelled at me, slammed their hands on the table, and threw a pen at me in a meeting." And they're like, "I wanna go to HR." And I'm like, "You can't, because HR is not gonna do anything about them." And then you're the person who went to HR, and you're gonna get fired. And that's not the way it should work. That's not the way that I think HR employees want it to work. I'm not saying that they are the problem either, but the job is litigation prevention. And it
Hmm.
is easier for them to let that boss fire you or to let you quit than it is for them to fire that bad boss who is essentially abusing his employees, unless it's something very, very egregious. So I I think it's hard, but I think we're incentivizing a lot of bad behavior right now. And I'll give one last example on this and then I'll stop. Early on in my career, I had an executive change. My VP or my CFO left and they brought in a VP of finance who was my boss. And the first meeting I had with him, he said I looked like I should be dancing on a table instead of sitting at it. Yeah, yeah. The early 2000s was a wild time, dude. And I had no idea how to respond in that situation, right? I was in my early 20s, and I just went on with my presentation because I was like, "I have no idea what to say to this man right now."
Mm,
And my board at the time, was all men and me and one other female. So there's one other female in the room. I have this meeting, I have this presentation. By the time I make it to my desk, the chief HR officer, who's a woman, the woman from my meeting, and the chief construction officer at the time, who was also a woman, are sitting in my desk. And they're like, "So, would you like to sue? Would you like a raise? Would you like to sign this paperwork that says you're not going to sue us, but we're going to immediately terminate him? Like, how
mm,
would you like us to proceed with what just happened?" Right. And that it was a very egregious statement. He did get fired and he got walked out. I also gave my 2 weeks to those three women in my office. Right. Like, I did not pass go. I did not collect $200. I didn't even think about it. I was like, yep, I'm done.
mm,
And that was a situation where I could have filed a complaint and action would have been taken against him. Like, that was egregious enough and public enough that it would have been cause for termination for him. And like I said, they did terminate him even though I didn't file a complaint over that one incident. But I have sat in similar meetings and heard leaders say similar things and watched them work there for 10 years after that. So I think it's a hard place where there's no perfect answer from a legal perspective,
mm.
but I think we've put so many protections in place that even people who say really bad, really egregious, really terrible things or behave really poorly end up protected by those same laws that are supposed to protect the employee who's actually being treated poorly.
I'm actually kind of in shock at that. I can't believe someone like just from being from being in a boardroom and knowing how PC it is to like jumping.
It was wild.
That's insane. you, you've
Well, and
totally put a spanner in the works there.
Harrison's like, "I don't even know what question to ask next because that was so wild." Well, and it was one of those situations where, like, I've gone over it. I mean, this was 20 years ago almost now, and I've gone over it 100 times in my head, right, of the
uh,
situation, and the comment that I get the most when I share this on social media is like, "But what were you wearing?" I get it all the time. So, for anyone listening who's wondering that same question, I think if I give him the benefit of the doubt, if I try to give him the benefit of the doubt and make him not a jerk, my dress had sequins on it. So maybe he meant like a disco ball, like it had that's the only thing in my head that I can think of that I'm like, maybe he meant because it had sequins on it, but it was a black dress to my knees that had sequins on it and a black cardigan. So it wasn't
uh,
super short or super revealing or anything, but it did have sequins on it. So in my head, I'm like, maybe he just meant I was shiny. Like, I don't, I think back and I'm like, what could he have possibly thought he was going to gain by that comment? But it is one of my wildest corporate
yeah,
stories is that quote. So
that's insane. There's a guy. I don't want to name any names. There's a retailer in Scotland that have or had a reputation for being extremely aggressive and extremely boisterous. They were Irish. They'd go out and they'd get absolutely smashed. They were typical Irish people. And there was a guy that came and worked for me, and he was talking about the CEO. And I was, oh, how is he? They're doing very well. Is he a good guy to work with? And he went, well, the first day I met him, I went into his room and gave him the sales report, and he chucked a chair across the room and smashed it because the sales were so bad. And this guy, like, he was an older guy, maybe 70 years old. And I was just like, oh my God. But that must have been what it was like back then. It was like you were in control. What are you going to do about it?
yeah, and it's not right, right? I'm not defending him,
Hmm.
obviously, but I do think like we've put a lot of protections in place for people to keep people from being wrongfully terminated, and I think
Mm.
bad people take advantage of that,
Yeah.
right? And to your point of throwing the chair, I could name 3 CEOs today who run businesses who I've gotten reports from clients through chairs in meetings. 3 today. And they won't get fired, I promise, even if I said their names, which I won't. But I do think that there's gotta be a happy medium, and
Yeah.
I think it's hard, right? Like with anything, there's no perfect policy that's going to protect all the right people and penalize all the wrong ones. Um, but I do think it has created an interesting company culture. What's the new phrase that I'm seeing trend? Job cracking is the new term, which is basically like I'm burnt out and I'm not going to work anymore, but I'm too afraid to quit because the job market sucks. It's called job cracking. And it's like people are in all these careers and they're just literally cracking at the seams and falling apart, but they're staying in this job because
Mm.
they have to, going back to our golden handcuffs conversation. And they're like, I don't want to leave because the job market is bad. And what if I end up working for somebody who throws chairs and they can't fire me anyway? So I'll just stay and I'll just coast in this job as long as possible. And again, I think it just comes back to incentivizing those bad behaviors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is there any traits? Because like we talk about CEOs chucking tables or saying outrageous stuff, but to a certain degree, as the head of a company, and I've dealt with quite, I've been very lucky that I've had a good few of them on. You kind of need to be a bit mental in order to or lack empathy to a certain degree in order to have the tunnel vision to get where you want to go. Like building a company from, the ground up to get it to 100 million, you need to have tunnel vision, and there's no room for shit. Like if you try and talk to a CEO and you're getting in his way, he's going to rip you apart. And I've seen it happen. And is there certain traits that are specific to CEOs that you've kind of become accustomed to seeing?
So there are a lot of studies that I did not run personally. There are lots of studies that indicate the most common traits among CEOs are narcissism, because you have to believe you're so cool and
Hmm.
so great and so right all the time to be able to face off with many of the people that a CEO has to face off, right? Because a CEO, we love to talk about the wage gap with CEOs and like their jobs. It is a hard job. Right? You're facing off with investors, you're never doing good enough, you're dealing with public perception, you're in the news all the time. You have, risk of personal harm and injury and kidnapping at all times. You are responsible for the lives of 10,000 employees, and it is a lot to be in that position. And there's lots of studies that show like narcissists are more successful because they're able to let a lot of things slide off their back, so to speak, to be like, they don't like me. That's a them problem. I'm great, right? They're able to deal with a lot more rejection. Um, what I see, and so there's a book called The Extraordinary Leader by John Zigweed, and it is I reference it all the time. I don't recommend reading it. It is a textbook, just to be super clear, but it is a really interesting book where they analyze 120,000 leaders across 67 different countries, and they look at what traits all of them have in common. And in the executives that I've worked with, I reference this book a lot because they talk about a couple interesting concepts. One, the best CEOs have what are called the morality trio, which is values, diversity, um, trustworthy, and honest and moral character. So those are the three. And they talk about how CEOs who have what they call spikes in those three tend to perform better. And the contrary example that they give is Enron, which was embezzling a lot of money and very fraudulent. And then the CEO basically went to jail. So, um, and they talk about how lots of CEOs get to that level and they don't have the morality trio, but they don't last very long
Hmm.
because at some point the board stops trusting them, or their employees stop trusting them, or their team stops trusting them. And that erodes their credibility as a CEO. So the morality trio is a high spike. And what they talk about in this book, which I always think is really interesting, I talk about it in my book as well, is the average person. We are taught it is better to be good at everything than to be bad at some things, right? So in school, you have to get all A's and B's in all your classes. You can't be failing some of your classes. You're taught to be good at everything. Or if you're going to play a sport, you need to be good at all positions. You can be great at one, but you got to be good at all the positions, right? We're taught this good as being good enough. And what the study found is the people who became executives were not good at everything. They were great at one or two things and shite at everything else.
It's a
But
Scottish word
those
right
one,
there.
yeah, but one or two things that they were really, really good at was enough to set them apart from all of their counterparts, from all of their coworkers, from all the people they worked with, that they moved so much higher and so much faster. And so what I think is common in CEOs that I work with is they're exceptionally gifted at one or two things. Usually some one of those one of two things is communication. They're exceptionally gifted at gift of gab. They can make themselves sound really confident even if they have no idea what they're talking about, and they're able to build relationships, right? Communication is almost always a spike of an executive leader. And then they usually have a specific spike that's either drives for results, customer focus. They're very risk adept. They, depending on the industry, they have some other spike that made them very well suited for that niche. And then they have enough morality that they can build trust and inspiration and direction and diversity within their teams. That is kind of the secret sauce to being a CEO is you have to spike in something. The mistake so many employees make is they go, "Well, I wanna be really well-rounded." I hate that phrase. "I wanna be really well-rounded. I'm good at analysis, and I'm good at finances, and I'm good at marketing, and I'm good at operations, and I'm good at doing my job, and I'm good at managing people, but I'm not great at anything." And those are the
Hmm.
people who get stuck in middle management because they're not great at anything, and so nobody wants to put them over an entire division or over an entire organization. Whereas the CEO is like, "Hey, I don't care about any of that. I am great at this." And they ride that coattail all the way to the top. So, um, I don't know if they all have narcissism. That seems like it would be a bit of a stretch. But there's definitely that like self-confidence, self-efficacy. They spike in communication, and then they are really, really great at one thing that they just do over and over and over again. And that one thing is what helps them climb.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just thinking about there's people that are high functioning within where I work at the moment, and you're absolutely right. Like I know there's specifically a couple of people that are just incredible at sales. They're unbelievable at sales, but everything else around them falls to pieces. But because they're just so incredible at sales, everyone goes, just leave them to do their thing because it will come. Like they're bringing in the money. I don't care that they're screwing up the display, whatever it might be. Just leave them because they're so good at what they're doing. It's fine. Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're so that's the study. Is that a study?
Yes. Yeah. So I have it somewhere in my bookcase, but it's The Extraordinary Leader,
Right.
by John Zigwade, and it tells you that spiking in a certain area is your best chance of success, right? And,
Mm,
if I use myself as an example, I'm very risk adverse, so risk adverse, it's wild, and I, frankly, do not have excellent attention to detail. I don't make a
mm,
ton of mistakes, but I'm not the person that you want looking for a messed up comma in a 40 paragraph essay. That's not my niche. But I am exceptional at communication and translation and organizing things so that they're simple to understand. That is my exceptional skill. And I have held a lot of different jobs. I have worked for CFOs, I have run construction teams, I have worked in marketing, I've run operation shops, I've run a call center, I've led tech teams, I've been a product manager, I've been a tech engineer, I've been a data scientist. I have done lots of different things, but what I'm good at is one thing. And I
mm,
just do that thing in all these different jobs. And it's something that I coach my clients is most people think of your career as a ladder. You're going to move straight up, become your boss, become your boss's boss, become your boss's boss's boss. But more often what happens is you have one skill and your career operates more like a lattice. You're going to move side to side, you're going to move up, you're going to move horizontally, you're going to move diagonally to get to whatever level you decide to end at. But your special skill is what's going to get you through all of those different roles. And so I do think when I work with my clients, especially at the executive level, they're just very good at one thing.
mm.
And they just do that thing in whatever company they're in whatever role they're in, and they just do that one thing over and over and over again, and they scale it, and they build a great network to support it. And those are the people who end up executives is because they know exactly what they're good at, and they just do that over and over and over again.
Being a CEO, is work-life balance a myth?
Um, yes. Full stop. Yes. Um, I think we're in an interesting era where we are in the rise of the social media star,
Mm,
right? We have the influencer who's like, I work 2 hours a day and I sold $10,000 worth of guides on my homepage and I don't do anything and it's great. And I think it's a fallacy, right? The people who are making real money, whether it's on social media or it's in passive income sales or it's in courses or it's in whatever you pick, they are hustling so much more than they want you to believe,
Hmm.
right? And if you are a CEO of a conglomerate of a large company, you are hustling all the time. And I'll use this example. He'll probably get upset with me, but I have a CEO who once took a call with me in a cave with no cell reception using a satellite phone while on a family vacation because something went wrong at work and we needed his answer. And
Yeah.
that is the reality. It doesn't mean you
Mm.
never take vacation with your family, but a cave with no cell reception on a satellite phone from a guide to get me the answer that I needed while he was on family vacation. Like that's it. That's the reality. And the CEO of Pepsi, former CEO of PepsiCo, has given a lot of interviews where she talks about like being a mom and being a CEO. And she's like, "You think I did all of it? No. You think I made my kids' soccer games? Nope. I missed most of them. You think I was there for parent teacher conferences? Nope. My husband had to go." And she's like, "You know who suffered the most of me being a CEO? My spouse, because CEO came first, kids came second, and he came last because that was the order that I had to have as a mom." And she does all these interviews about it. You can look it up, and she's a really interesting personality. But I think to an extent, she's one of the few being honest, which is like if you're going to be CEO and you're going to be responsible for all these people and you're going to be dealing with investors, you're going to be answering questions, you're the only person who can approve certain things, your work life balance is gone. It doesn't mean you can't find some balance, right? You can prioritize some things, but you can't prioritize everything at the same time. And so you
Hmm.
can't be the perfect mom who bakes sourdough for your children and does homeschool and activities with them and be CEO and be a wonderful spouse who's going on dates all the time and really caring for their feelings and be fit and have a hobby. And like, it's not feasible to do all of these things. And most of the CEOs I work with are single minded focused. It doesn't mean they're sacrificing their family. I do think there's a lot of divorce at the executive levels or a lot of if not divorce, a lot of negligence, like, "Hey, I just don't talk to my spouse very often because I'm so busy with my career." There are exceptions to that rule where people are very, very intentional and they really care about their families, and that is a priority for them. But I don't know that it comes with any more balance so much as it comes with more intentionality and more investment in the people around you. But short answer is, yeah, you become a CEO, your work-life balance is pretty much gone, uh, and until you're ready at the point where you don't have to be CEO anymore. And then you're not really an acting CEO anyways, you've got other people in place to do that.
Yes, it's an interesting one because I was actually in I was in Namibia, just about South Africa, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, and I was kind of taking calls, and I was actually reviewing edits that my team had done while I was like camping in the desert. And I remember my girlfriend just being like, what are you? You're meant to be on holiday. Why are you doing this?" And I was like, "Well, if I don't check it, then it won't go out. And if it doesn't go out, then the company doesn't move forward in my specific area. So I need that. It's just, that's what needs to happen." But I think that this is where the perceived lazy people
Mhm.
come into it, because they look at the CEO or they look at someone in an extremely high salary or that has the nice car, the nice watch, and they want to get there, but they're not willing to sacrifice what needs sacrificed in order to do that. And I think
Mhm.
that's potentially where, I know we were talking about laziness earlier. That's probably where it comes from. Is I
Mhm.
feel like people in this generation specifically like the things that they see on social media. They want the things that they see on social media, but they just will not put the time and effort and sacrifice in to get there.
I don't know if you follow Layla Hormozy or if you've had her on your podcast. If you haven't, she would be an excellent guest. But she did a series not long ago where she talked about the hustle of building a business. And she says, she's like, they are lying to you that you can build a business with no effort and that you can have all this free time and that your life is going to be so easy and it's going to be great. She's like, "You want to know the truth? I work every hour of every day. I am checking my email, I am hustling, I am working." And now, as my business has scaled, I don't have to work as much, right? I can take a day off every once in a while. But like, even on vacations, her husband is Alex Hormozy and they built this multiple large businesses together. She's like, "Alex is taking calls. I'm taking calls. We're working with our team." And she's like, "And you know why? because I like material possessions. There's no fluff. There's no lie. It's like, I want to make a ton of money. I want to be able to buy what I want to be able to buy. But the cost of that is I work all the freaking time. And you're right. I think you can choose to have a lazy girl job or a lazy guy job where you're just working your, 25 hours a week and you put in a bare minimum and you collect your paycheck. You can absolutely do that, but you cannot do that and have the nice car and the nice watch and the family vacations and the big house and the yada, yada, yada. There's always that trade off. So I think you're 100% spot on that people look at this and they're like, I want that and I don't want to do anything. And I'm like, okay, well, one of those two is going to happen. Probably not the one where you get everything you want, but one of those two is going to happen. And it's, I went to lunch last night with a girlfriend of mine who runs a similar business to me. And she was like, Kendall, I work all the time. And I was like, yep, that sounds right.
Get used to it.
She was like, I need to get better at not working so much. And I was like, we all do, but we also want to scale. And we know that when we're not investing, it's not scaling the same way. And same is true of your career. If you're not investing in proving yourself at the next level and in your relationships and how you're going to execute work, you're not going to get promoted. You're not going to move up the chain. And it all
Hmm.
comes down to this same trade off conversation. You can make those trade offs, but what I talk about in my book is, I believe that the career game is a game. You are making moves to play this game. It's like chess, right? There are lots of ways to win chess. There's not one way to win chess. But if you're not playing by the rules, if you don't know the rules, if you're not making your moves intentionally, if you're not making trade offs intentionally, you're going to lose the game and you're not going to get any of the things that you want. And so, if you are willing to intentionally sacrifice salary for freedom, you can make that change. If you are willing to sacrifice your time to make more money or retire early, or if you're willing to sacrifice some of the consumerism to have a huge nest egg and not have to work after you're 45, like these are trade offs you make, but you have to make them on purpose.
Hmm. It's funny you mentioned Alex Hormozy because I'm literally looking at my notes right now because I wrote a quote down from him. I think it was him, or it was either him or Chris Williamson, and it was, I think this must have been 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's so relevant. So I'll read it out. And I think he tweeted it. He said, "Lazy people don't know how to start. Weak people don't know how to finish. Successful people don't know how to stop. People demand success but refuse to work weekends. People want opportunity but won't talk to strangers. People claim ambition but sleep in every day. We are the result of our actions, not our aspirations." Isn't that just
Yes.
awesome?
So good. And that's the reality is, I believe all high performing women have ADHD to an extent. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do as many things as we do. But you have to want to do these things. That's why I'm going to use fitness as an example, right? People who are healthier and more fit tend to be more driven, right? They tend to own their own companies, they tend to build their own thing. And it has nothing to do with how fit they are, it has everything to do with the fact that they have more discipline, right? They know how to make themselves do the things they don't want to do to get the result that they want, right? Fitness is a great external example of people who work really hard. That's not to say that there aren't people who work hard who aren't fit. It's just not a priority for them. But I think that a lot of the time, fitness is a great example of like, I care about looking a certain way. I'm willing to do the uncomfortable thing in order to look that way. And that translates to business and personal life and other things. But the same is true in business. Like if you look, I often will use, let's use Elon Musk as an example, controversial example, but one nonetheless. He has built tons of completely different, disparate companies in a relatively short period of time. He works all the time, right? And people who work at Tesla will tell you that the culture is awful. Like you are expected to work 80 hours a week. And it's like, yeah, because Elon's working 80 hours a week, right? You work at
Hmm.
PayPal, you're expected to work all the time. Yeah, because Elon's working all the time. And he has built cultures that are reflective of his working style, which I don't know is excellent for the end employee necessarily. But whether you like him or you don't like him, I don't know that the dude sleeps. Like he is working all of the time. And that was the cost. Alex Hormozy is another example of like when he was building his business, and he talks about this in his book $100 Million Offer. He didn't sleep for like weeks. He just worked all the time. He traveled all the time. He built a business model all the time. He's talking to his wife about it all the time because that's what it takes to get going and to get started and get scale. And then you can reassess, okay, do I make enough money now that I can scale back or I can have a little more work-life balance? But you're right. I love that. I love that quote. I would like you to email me that quote after today's
Yeah.
interview so that I have it handy. But it's true. Like successful people don't know how to stop. They don't
Mm,
build something and then go, "This was fun," and then retire. They just
mm.
build the next thing. They do the next thing. They scale the next thing because they don't know how to stop, and that's satisfaction for them.
If I was to come with you asking for career advice, what would be the first three questions you ask me?
First thing I always ask every client is, "How do you want to be known at work?" Um, we believe oftentimes that our reputation is out of our control, and it's not. So if you know how you want to be known at work, you know what you want to be known for, it is much easier to craft a career that's going to be successful for you. The second thing is what you don't want to be known for at work, because these are not only the criteria that we hold ourselves to, but they are the triggers that we have in other people. If I don't want to be known for being late at work and Harrison is late to every call, I hate Harrison with like a visceral reaction that I can't explain, right? Because I have this expectation of myself that I'm projecting on other people. And until we understand what we're projecting on other people, we can't build effective, lasting relationships with them. And the third thing that I ask every client is, who is influential in your workplace? Who are the people who speak in a meeting and everybody shuts up? Who are the people who can make a call? Who are the people who are always brought in on the high priority projects or always brought in when something goes wrong? Identifying influential people around you is a skill. They're not always the most senior. They could be your peer who just everybody seems to love for whatever reason. But once you can identify the influential people around you, you can build intentional relationships with them that are lasting and authentic. And that's what's going to bring your career forward is, who do you know? What are they good at? What made them have so much authority and influence? Can you build some of those same skills yourself so that you have authority and influence, right? Learning from people who are doing the thing you want to do is the best way to scale. So if you know how you want to be known at work and what you're good at, what you don't want to be known for at work, what your triggers are, and who around you is influential and has built strong executive presence, if you can do those three things, your career will grow exponentially.
Well, I think that's pretty good advice. Well, listen, thank you so much uh, for everything and spending the time. I know you're extremely busy, and I really appreciate it. What's your Instagram or your social handles? Where can people find you? I know that you've got the book. We'll talk a little bit about that. Where can people find all this stuff?
Yeah, so I am that career coach. So Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, X, I don't know what it's called now, Threads, whatever. That career coach. I'm there on all of them. And then my book is called Secrets of the Career Game: 36 Strategies to Get Ahead in Your Career. And I wrote it as a tactical textbook for how to get out of your own way. So it has templates, it has tips, it has instructions on what to do, it has scripts for how to handle different situations. It is a how-to guide for the workplace that I wish I had had 15 years ago when I was getting stuck in my career, and so I hope it's helpful. But yeah, if you want humorous advice, reality of the workplace, sometimes snarky comments, check me out on Instagram at that career coach.